Pat, get on your YouTubes. Go to YouTube, search Times Radio. You can watch along as Tim Shipman and I pause the action live from the House of Commons. We watch as Boris Johnson faces Keir Starmer. What are they going to talk about today? We'll find out next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked is next. First, a quick look at the headlines this lunchtime. Labour's Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Lisa Nandy says plans to break the link between geography and destiny unveiled by the government today fall far short of what the UK needs. The government's looking at 12 ways of improving the lives of those outside London and the southeast of England by 2030. Ranges from boosting public transport to ensuring there's access to 5G broadband. Michael Gove unveiling those plans in the House of Commons later on. Elsewhere, Manchester United forward Mason Greenwood's been released on bail while police continue investigating. The 20-year-old was initially arrested on Sunday following allegations of rape and assault and further detained yesterday. Boris Johnson's under even more pressure as a senior Tory MP's revealed he's the latest to submit a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister. Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, says he doesn't think the PM realises how worried colleagues are in every corner of the party. And the energy regulator, Ofgem, will reveal tomorrow morning what is expected to be a crippling rise in energy bills for millions of households. The energy price cap will come into force in April. We'll have a full news roundup at 12:30. But now it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Well, here we are again then, live on Times Radio, live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. You can watch along as well. Let us know where you're listening. Bonjour from France. Hello from Horsham. Martin in Derbyshire. Hugh in Portugal. So go online to the YouTube channel. Let us know where you're watching. Tim Shipman here in the studio.
Hello, Matt.
What should Keir Starmer do today? I mean, the last 2 or 3 weeks has been what we would call blockbuster. All to do with parties and resignations and defections and so on. Should he leave that to one side and have a go at something else, or does he keep hammering away?
I rather suspect he might, though he might be tempted to try and sort of draw out the Prime Minister on some of the stuff that went on in the statement earlier in the week. What Boris Johnson has sort of not quite got right when he turns up and makes these apologies is his tone, and it's an interesting conundrum for Johnson today because a lot of his own side didn't like the sort of grandstanding, shouty tone when he was supposed to be being apologetic earlier in the week. But now it's PMQs and they expect a sort of grandstandy, shouty tone. So I would have thought Starmer would want to get onto something meaty and not give Boris Johnson a chance to do all of that shouting and screaming today. And he might be advised to leave alone the sort of the thing that we've all been obsessing about for a little while.
It was interesting just speaking to Charles Walker, long-standing Conservative MP, talked to me on the show, and he just sounds weary and sad about the state of the party. Yes. And that's actually the mood. You know, there are some people who really love Boris Johnson, some people who really hate him, and there's a whole load in the middle who are just a bit depressed about it all.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But actually, Starmer, if he wants to go on that subject, he can do, and he's got lots of ammunition he can use. The slightly curious thing about Starmer's performance earlier in the week is he didn't actually read out that much from the Sue Gray report. There are things that appear to contradict things Boris Johnson has said in the chamber of the House of Commons that he could have pinned him down on a bit more. Instead, he decided to go with his own fairly grandstanding YouTube clip, denouncing the PM's character. He didn't really pin him down on the details. So there's plenty he could go at, and he could start quoting a lot of these Tory MPs who don't want their Prime Minister around either. So there's, the option is there, but it wouldn't surprise me if he took a different path, because he's tended to want at moments of high tension to show that there are serious issues at play, and the levelling up agenda may be one that he wants to take an axe to as well, and just drill into that and say why it's not enough. If that's the government's big announcement of the day, if that's likely to be what's on the news this evening, it might pay Starmer to get his own clips for the 6 and 10 o'clock news.
And that's sort of interesting, the tension that on the one hand he needs, it's one thing if Boris Johnson's in the doldrums in the polls, but Keir Starmer needs a positive reason why people are turning to him. Before we go to PMQs, Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, is just making a statement outlining this business of why you can't accuse each other of lying, which I've had so many messages about this week. Let's take a listen to what Lindsay Hoyle's just been saying.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I wish to make a statement about the House practices regarding accusing members of lying or deliberately misleading the House. I recognise there are frustrations around the House's practices. Firstly, let me say that there are means by which accusations of lying may be brought before the House, including by means of a substantive motion. The Scottish National Party did so on their opposition day in November. However, members may not accuse each other of lying or deliberately misleading the House unless such a substantive motion is under consideration. Erskine May is clear that it is to preserve the character of parliamentary debate, which I take to mean to stop it descending into fruitless cycles of accusation and counter-accusation. May I also say that expressions when used in respect of the members, which are regarded with particular seriousness, generally leading to prompt intervention from the Chair and often a requirement on a member to withdraw the words, include charges uttering deliberate falsehoods. It is important to stress context. Similar words said in different proceedings might attract a different response from the Chair, depending on the subject being debated, tone and other considerations, but in general the Chair will not tolerate accusations of lying or deliberately misleading the House. That is the long-standing practice of the House, as set out in Erskine May and followed by successive speakers and deputy speakers. Of course, long-standing practices may change. For example, if the House decided it wanted a different approach, perhaps informed by the Procedure Committee inquiry, but it's not for me to change the practice unilaterally. Therefore, I ask members to respect this approach. I know feelings run high on important issues we discuss, but there are plenty of ways of making strong feelings felt within the rules and without placing the Chair in the invidious position of having to order members to withdraw on seeking their suspension. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'd like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV.
So that's the Commons Speaker, Lindsay Hall there, laying down the law, Tim Shipman.
Well, saying what the law currently is, but saying if you want to change it, you can, which is a different approach than his predecessor, John Bercow, took, which was that, you know, parliamentary rules can evolve, and they have over the years, and I'm going to evolve them a little bit further. So he's sort of saying, if you feel strongly enough about this, do something about it, but don't expect me to change it for you.
It's interesting, because when I interviewed Lindsay Hoyle in Chorley last year, when we went to Chorley, and I asked him about this, and he basically said, I can't do anything. I'm bound by the rules, and I'm enforcing the rules. And if they want to change, you know, he said he'd like to have the power to intervene and say, look, that's not true. But then he can't be a live fact checker on every you know, and there's a difference between what is a lie and what is a different interpretation of a
Well, and sometimes it's in the wording as well.
Yeah.
We've had these conversations ourselves in PMQs where, you know, someone's accused of saying something, and it's... you have to be very precise about the words to check that it is a porcupine. And it's not always clear in live debate. In fact, I think the Speaker has made the odd mistake on that front.
Yeah, it's intervened, and it hasn't quite, but it sounds like something which it isn't quite. Right then, you can listening along on Times Radio. You can watch along on the YouTube channel. Nice to have you along. Loads and loads of you are already watching. Lindsay Hoyle's a national treasure, says Mark. Someone else says, bring back Bercow. That's Chris. Hello from sunny Crosby.
That was going to be someone called John, but
always nice to have you watching along, John. Somebody in Stockholm, the United States, the People's Republic of Islington. Hello from Washington DC. You're all watching along. Here we go then. Question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Position, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And following your opening remarks, I just want to say to the members opposite, theirs is the party of Winston Churchill. Our parties stood together as we defeated fascism in Europe. Now their leader stands in the House of Commons parroting the conspiracy theories of violent fascists to try and score cheap political points. He knows, exactly what he is doing. It's
Boris Johnson
time
has levelled
to
against Keir
restore
Starmer.
some dignity. Mr. Speaker, one of the most absurd claims made on behalf of Operation Save Big Dog is the Prime Minister and the Chancellor writing in the Sunday Times that they are the tax-cutting Conservatives. Why do these alleged tax cutters keep raising taxes on working people?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on his first point, I don't want to make heavy weather of this, but I am informed that in 2013, the Right Honourable Gentleman apologised and took full responsibility for what had happened on his watch. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that was the right thing to do. And Mr. Speaker, on what we're doing to tackle cost of living and taxation, Mr. Speaker, our COVID recovery plan is absolutely vital in helping people with the cost of living, lifting up universal credit payments, Mr. Speaker, by cutting the tax that people effectively pay, lifting the living wage, Mr. Speaker, helping councils with another £500 million for those who are facing particular hardship, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing, and this is absolutely vital, is increasing the number of high-wage, high-skill jobs in this country. 420,000 more on the payroll than there were before the pandemic began, because we've had the fastest exit from COVID of any European economy, Mr. Speaker, because we had the fastest vaccine and booster rollout.
OK, let's pause it there. There's quite a lot to pick through that. So both of them sort of talking around the issue. But this is the claim that Boris Johnson made earlier this week on Monday, that Keir Starmer was busier prosecuting journalists than he was prosecuting Jimmy Savile. And that's because while Keir Starmer was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service's Director of Public Prosecutions, a decision was taken not to prosecute Jimmy Savile while he was still alive. But Keir Starmer was not involved in that decision. And I think what Boris Johnson there is teased out is that it did happen on his watch and Keir Starmer did apologise afterwards. But because this is something that's done the rounds on social media, as you were saying, in sort of far-right groups, it's become incredibly, I don't know what the word is, toxic, volatile.
I mean, it's a hugely controversial thing to be saying because of the kind of people who are circulating it. And Boris Johnson sort of knows that. And my understanding is that he was told not to do it by his own staff, and he decided to do it anyway because it's the sort of thing that's popular with some of his backbenchers. Though, of course, there is a slight double standard here from both of them. They're both arguing slightly under false pretences. Keir Starmer is saying to Boris Johnson, some of the stuff that happened on your watch, was not your responsibility, but you're to blame and you must take responsibility. And he's sitting back and saying, well, Keir Starmer didn't make that decision himself, but he was responsible because he was in charge. So they're both slightly trying to have it both ways. I think the difference is that Starmer would say that Boris Johnson was at these parties and knew they were parties, he watched everybody having a drink.
And I suppose ultimately there is a material difference between saying, you're the Prime Minister, running number 10. What goes on in your number 10, in your government, on your watch is your business. And what is clearly an attempt to suggest that Keir Starmer is in some way a defender of
a paedophile.
And that's the so even if it is technically correct to say that Jimmy Savile was not prosecuted on Keir Starmer's watch, it is such an extraordinary thing to level against him that maybe while Lindsay Hall's talking about sort of trying to raise the standard of debate, maybe you just don't need to go there. Maybe.
Well, look, the important thing is you and I can have whatever view we want on this, but what is the view of Boris Johnson's own MPs? Yeah. Boris Johnson's own MPs went into that statement wanting to hear from him a sincere apology and an attempt to recover some of the ground he's lost. For the first couple of minutes, he did quite well, and then he went on to this, and a lot of them recoiled in horror, to be frank. And it's not just the usual suspects, the sort of, what Boris Johnson would brand the Ramonas and the people who've always been out to get him, the disgruntled ex-ministers. Yeah. There are quite a lot of people, mainstream people who backed his Brexit and wanted him to be Prime Minister, who think that was an unseemly thing to do. And Starmer wanted to get his point across, and Johnson has got his back.
We'll see. Well, let's see where Keir Starmer goes next, because he then went on to tax, and we had an argument about.
There was quite a lot of blah blah after
quite
that.
Quite a lot of blah blah. So we'll move on from that. Interestingly, somebody's put on the YouTube channel, Starmer has started to become more of a politician and less a lawyer. I think that's definitely right. He's definitely had some had his Weetabix. Let's see where he goes with question 2.
Starmer. Mr. Speaker, it's not just the national insurance rise. Thresholds for income tax frozen. A stealth tax on working people. The threshold for tuition fees, frozen. A stealth tax on working people. Local authorities forced to increase council tax, a stealth tax on working people. You can be as stealthy as you like, but you can't hide reality. We have the highest tax burden for 70 years during the middle of an inflation crisis. So I ask the Prime Minister again, why do he and the Chancellor keep raising taxes on working people?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is helping people with the cost of living, cutting taxes for those on universal credit, Mr. Speaker, as I have said, helping people with the cost of their fuel, Mr. Speaker, with the cold weather payments, the warm homes payments, Mr. Speaker, doing all the things that this country would expect, lifting the living wage, which this party, Mr. Speaker, introduced. This party, this government, has increased by the record amount, Mr. Speaker. And above all, the most important thing that we are doing is helping people into work. 500,000 people off welfare into work under our Way to Work scheme. More people in work now than before the pandemic began, and that is the record of this government. Labour, never forget, Mr. Speaker, there's never been a Labour government that left office with unemployment lower than when they check that out, Mr. Speaker.
So sort of slightly greatest hits there. I think Boris Johnson might have slightly slipped up there. He's been very good in recent weeks to say that there were more people on payrolls because he was picked up by the fact checkers. He's kept him. We've got more people in employment than there were before the pandemic. And the fact checker said that was wrong because if you include the self-employed in that, 600, we were actually still lower. But I think he may have slightly slipped. Let's not get too bogged down in that.
Sounds like you'd like to be the leader of the opposition.
There's a good argument emerging here, though, isn't there? On the one hand, the Conservatives, they say with a tax cut, the Conservatives more money in your pocket. Then Keir Starmer is a pretty good list, putting up national insurance, catching more people in the income tax thresholds, and tuition fees and council tax.
Yeah, it's an effective attack from Labour, and they, of course, have said they would oppose the national insurance rise. So they've got, some grounds for doing it. Starmer also knows it enrages Johnson's Tory backbenchers who want him to be cutting tax rather than putting it up. But of course, pretty well every time there's a spending commitment from the government, Labour say it isn't enough, which does slightly imply eventually that they would have to put up tax even more themselves. So once again, they're talking
to reversing the national insurance.
Well, they reverse that. They'd probably then have to find it from somewhere else. But presumably it would be those wicked rich people who had to pay it all.
Warren's been in touch. Come on, Chorley. We know which way you lean politically, but either both Starmer and Bojo are ultimately responsible for what happened on their watch, or neither are. Could you tell me which way I lean politically, Warren? Because I'd love to know. Text 87222, start mention the word Times, or you can post comments on YouTube. Let's go back. Hello to Tokyo. Thank you for joining. Let's go back to question number 3.
Keir Starmer.
Lots of words, lots of bluster, no answers. Word of warning. Word of warning, Prime Minister. That's not going to work with the police.
That's quite a good joke.
I'll tell him why they're putting taxes up. Low growth. In the decade of Tory government before the pandemic, growth slumped. It was much, much weaker than under the last Labour government. If the Tories matched our record on growth, we would have £30 billion more to spend on public services without having to raise a single tax. Mr. Speaker, surely even this Prime Minister doesn't need someone else to tell him that he and the Chancellor are having to raise taxes because the Tories failed to grow the economy over a decade.
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, I think everybody in this country can see that we've been through the biggest pandemic since for 100 years, that we've looked after the people of this country to the tune of £400 billion, that we've put into furlough and all the other schemes, 11.7 million people protected. Everybody knows the cost of that, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, in spite of all the difficulties that we have faced, we have now got the fastest growth in the G7. Absolutely true. We've got youth unemployment. We've got youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker. We've got 3 times as much tech investment coming into this country as there is in France, twice as much as there is in Germany. Yes, that's absolutely true, Mr. Speaker. And never forget, if you want to know about Labour economics, never forget the last time they were in office, Mr. Speaker, when they were finally booted out, they left a note saying there's no money left. That's the way they run the country, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
I'm going to jump in now with my fact-checking hat on. Boris Johnson repeating the claim, we've got the fastest growing economy in the G7. According to Full Fact, that's true if you look over the past 12 months. But if you look at growth over the last quarter of data, the UK is 5th. So as ever with these things.
Well, it depends where you draw the line.
Depends where you slice it. I'm not sure that Keir Starmer's getting anywhere.
No, he may not be, but
specifics.
But I think what he's doing, I mean, I've got messages on my phone here from Tory advisors saying that, much better for Labour to go on cost of living. This is going to be far and away the biggest domestic political issue of the year, putting aside anything else that Boris Johnson may delight us with in his personal activities. This is the terrain on which the local elections are going to be fought, and it makes sense for him to get onto it. But what he's doing quite successfully, I would say today, which is not something he often manages to pull off, is he's doing, he can get credit for doing the serious subject, but he's also got a few good gags that relate back to, the thing that we've all been obsessing about.
That line, the line about word of advice, that's not going to work with the police. Even Boris Johnson laughed at that.
Yeah, I mean that's a properly funny line. And again, there are PMQs jokes, which we sort of titter along to, thinking that's frightfully clever, or people behind him cheer because it's so crude that it raises a smile. But that's an actual one that people laugh at because it's funny.
But there was only question 3. We'll see if Boris Johnson's already done his greatest hits. Let's see how many more times we hear that. Let's go to question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the UK...
Some people won't be getting more because they won't be here to hear it, so Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has suffered the worst economic crisis in the G7. The Prime Minister has more chance of persuading the public that he didn't hold any parties than he has of persuading them that the economy is booming. High taxes are not just the result of low growth. Under this government, we've seen a pandemic of waste and fraud. From the Prime Minister's yacht to government contracts for mates of ministers, they've treated taxpayers as an ATM machine for their mates and their lifestyles. Now we find, Mr. Speaker, they've written off £8.7 billion on PPA, and the Chancellor's writing off £4.3 billion in fraud. That's enough to cover the tax hike he's inflicting on working people. So why did this government block the National Crime Agency from investigating all the billions they lost to fraud?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we despise fraud and those who steal from the taxpayer, and that's why we've already recovered £743 million in lost furlough money, Mr. Speaker, £2.2 billion that was stolen in bounce-back loans, and we will go on. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I am proud of what this government and this country did in securing record quantities of PPE and record time, Mr. Speaker, in furloughing and looking after the entirety of British business and society in the way that we did, Mr. Speaker. And once again, Captain Hindsight comes to this House and attacks the government for doing exactly what he urged us to do 18 months ago. Mr. Speaker, it so happens that I found a letter. I've been rustling in my notes, Mr. Speaker. And I found a letter which I will place for your convenience in the House, in the library of the House, Mr. Speaker, from the Shadow Chancellor to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Deluxe, suggesting that we could secure PPE supplies. This is on April the 22nd, 2020. Secure PPE supplies from from a theatrical costumier, and that we could get ventilators from a professional football agent, Mr. Speaker. No wonder under Labour, fraud was running at £21 billion per year, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of what this government did to secure PPE, and I'm proud of the way we protected this country.
We like a bit of House of Commons theatre. and brandishing a letter they've dug up. So the Shadow Chancellor was obviously Rachel Reeves.
Yes.
I think, was he saying that was a letter sent to the Levelling Up Department? Diluc? I think that was him trying to shorten the Levelling Up Department. But that's a sign that number 10 political operation might still have a little bit of life left in it yet.
Yes, exactly. This is an old favourite for Starmer, and, you watch and listen to focus groups, and the contracts for mates stuff cuts through. My general impression over the last year is that the public doesn't quite buy the waste argument in the same way. They realise the government had to go and buy loads of stuff, and that some of it would be duff and that money would be wasted. And that doesn't cut through in quite the same way. And Boris Johnson sort of knew it was coming and had something to reply with. Yeah. So, if you're scoring this, we're on question 4. That's now 3-1 rather than 4-0.
And I'm surprised he didn't make more with Theo Agnew, the minister who literally resigned at the dispatch box last week, specifically over the fraud. Boris Johnson boasts about claiming about, was it 743 million and 2.7 billion? It's a huge amount of money that they've written off in fraud.
Absolutely gigantic.
And you're right, hammering away at that rather than saying, when they were told you need to buy some more PPE, so they threw the kitchen sink at buying loads of PPE, and now they've had to write down the value of some of that. That seems like that's what you would do in the middle of a crisis.
I think the public gives the government a pass on that stuff. And again, messages from people within the government saying that's not the best argument for Starmer. There's a better argument that he could have made, and it's the one you're suggesting.
Yeah, no, it's an interest. But also, I just think it's the fact that Michael Gove's had a rummage in the drawer and found that letter from Rachel Reeves is hugely entertaining. Right, look, let's go back. Then this is the last question. Question number 6 from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer. Who wants to be the first to leave? Please put your hand up because I'm going to pick one of you. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister might want to sharpen how he answers questions under interview. He's going to need it in the next few weeks. Waste and low growth explain why we have high taxes, but they don't explain why it's always working people that are asked to pay more. Yesterday, he ordered his troops not to support a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. As a result, the country is missing out on over £1 billion we could have used to cut taxes on energy bills for working people. Today, he's ordering his troops to vote for tax cuts for banks. As a result, the country is missing out on another £1 billion we could have spent cutting taxes for working people. Why are the Chancellor and the Prime Minister protecting oil companies and bank profits while putting taxes up on working people?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's just get to the heart of what this is all about. This is all about dealing with the consequences of the biggest pandemic this country has seen, with an unprecedented economic crisis in which the state had to come forward and look after the people of this country to the tune of £408 billion. But everybody can see the fiscal impacts of that. Shall I tell you what this government and this country is voting for and what we're doing? We're investing now in 45,000 more NHS workers, more people in our NHS this year than there were last year. 10,000 more nurses, 10,900 more nurses, about 5,000 more doctors, Mr. Speaker, 9 million more scans, 100 community diagnostics hubs to help people to get the scans and treatment they need. And the incredible thing, the lamentable thing is that the party opposite, the party of Nye Bevan, Mr. Speaker, voted against those funds, voted against that investment, and they would have made our COVID recovery impossible.
What? Keir Starmer.
Yeah, so I've slightly miscounted my questions there. So we have, in fact, got another one. So let's listen to that, then we'll wrap up, Tim. Let's go back to Keir Starmer. Rachel Reeves there shouting, is that the best he could do?
The Conservative Party are the party of high taxes because they're the party of low growth. They are the party of high taxes because they're the party of eye-watering waste. Mr. Speaker, we know this Prime Minister has no respect for decency or honesty. I can take it when it's aimed at me, but I won't accept it when he gaslights the British public, writing absurd articles about cutting taxes at a time when he's squeezing working people to the pips. Isn't it the case, Mr Speaker, that he and his Chancellor are the Tory Thelma and Louise, hand in hand, as they drive the country off the cliff and into the abyss of low growth and high tax?
Mr Gullis, I think you've been trilled for long enough and you don't want to be trilled anymore. And that is the last comment I have, or otherwise I will ring your mother. Keir Starmer.
Isn't it true, Mr Speaker, that he and the Chancellor are the Tory Thelma and Louise, hand in hand as they drive the country off the cliff and into the abyss of low growth and high tax?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman is Dick Dastardly and Muttley. Both of them pulling in different directions. We know they have different views, Mr Speaker. We are getting on with the job, Mr Speaker, and just in the last few days, and of course, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that they've done nothing to support our COVID recovery plan. They've voted against our plans to support the NHS. But what we're doing, just in the last few days, while he's been fixated on the issues that he's absolutely determined to escalate, what we've done, we've opened free ports across the country just in the last few days. We're getting 500,000 people off welfare into work with our Way to Work plan. In just a few short minutes, Mr Speaker, I hope he will hang around, because he will hear my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, deliver the long-awaited Levelling Up white paper, full of good stuff, including 55 education investment areas across our country. A wonderful moral and economic mission to level up and give opportunity across the whole country. A fantastic vision for this country, Mr Speaker. They have nothing of the kind to offer the people of this country. Mr Speaker, while we are getting on with coming out of COVID with the fastest economic recovery in the G7, the fastest, he would have kept us in lockdown, Mr Speaker. We're fixing the NHS and social care when they voted against it, and they have no plan. And Mr Speaker, we are building a coalition. We are building a coalition.
Just a minute.
I think the Speaker might have saved him there.
This way, not that way. Maybe Specsavers might be the answer to see where I am. And can I just say, Dame Caroline Dinage is desperate to get the next question to you. Dame Diana Caroline Dinage.
Dame Caroline Carnage. Good Lord.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, Keir Starmer's jokes are slightly better. I think Lindsay Hoyle's.
Yeah, the second time he tried the joke about the police, it wasn't
quite so good.
And it landed pretty flat, didn't it? But Boris Johnson there, I mean, the last two answers, I mean, if he delivered the greatest hits earlier on, he's moved on to the very best of Boris Johnson and then the essential Boris Johnson to finish.
I think, yeah,
tricky to keep finding
at
album
the end there,
titles.
I think he reached the sort of repeat to fade.
Yes.
But nobody turned his mic down. Now, there's an interesting argument here, an economic argument the Labour Party are trying to mount, that the Conservative Party is the party of high taxes. People can understand that. I think if you start getting to low growth, I'm not sure people know what that means.
No, and the party of high taxes because of low growth is a Rachel Reeves line, which Starmer is now deploying. And
economically, it might be right, but it's not. It's a hard sell.
It's not. Yeah.
The other thing is as well, the Thelma and Louise, not new. Pat McFadden, who's Rachel Reeves' deputy in the Treasury team, used it in the House of Commons yesterday. So they obviously thought that landed so well they'll have another go at it. And then Mail Online then dutifully photoshopped them up.
Whereas Dick Dastardly and Muttley is entirely an inspirational prime ministerial bit of tap dancing.
The other thing that I just don't think is going to land with anyone, gaslighting. No normal person knows what that means, I'm going to posit.
No, it's a good one for the Twitters.
Good for the Twitters. So who do we think won that in the end? I think
it was a lot closer than given the week he's had. If he lost that 4-2, he'd be reasonably content, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I think, will we remember it tomorrow? Possibly not. Anyway, thank you for all of your comments on the YouTubes. So Richard says, I asked myself, what is the purpose of PMQs? It's a bit existential.
Stick around. Yeah,
we'll find out. We'll find out. We'll do the best. We'll do the best of the rest next after we get some news from Alex Morgan.
Across the UK, on DAB, online, and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Matt, thank you. Good afternoon. So Keir Starmer has compared the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to Thelma and Louise, attacking their plans to tackle the cost of living crisis. At Prime Minister's questions, the Labour leader accused Boris Johnson of driving the country into an era of high tax and low growth. In response, Mr Johnson compared Mr Starmer to Dick Dastardly and Muttley and defended the government's approach.
Lifting up universal credit payments, Mr Speaker, by cutting the tax that people effectively pay, lifting the living wage, Mr Speaker, helping councils with another £500 million for those who are facing particular hardship, Mr Speaker.
It comes as the energy regulator Ofgem will reveal tomorrow morning what is expected to be a crippling rise in energy bills for millions of households. The regulator says it's moving forward the announcement of new cap on bills from next Monday. The senior Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood is the latest to reveal he'll be submitting a letter of no confidence in Boris Johnson. A leadership contest will be triggered if 54 letters go into the 1922 committee. Mr Ellwood, the chair of the Defence Select Committee, says the party is slipping into a very ugly place. Mason Greenwood has been released on bail after being questioned over the alleged rape and assault of a woman. The Manchester United footballer was originally taken into custody on Sunday before being further arrested on suspicion of sexual assault and threats to kill yesterday. The Home Secretary has hit back at criticism from the French President about Britain's attempts to tackle migrant crossings. Emmanuel Macron reportedly told the French newspaper La Voix du Nord that the UK economy relied on low-paid, illegal immigrant labour. He's also quoted as saying there is no legal immigration route. Priti Patel told MPs on the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee that Macron's comments are wrong. They're absolutely wrong, so let me be very clear about that. Looking to the weather now, low cloud affecting many parts with some light rain and drizzle in places, mainly in the north. Some sunny spells largely in the south and east, where it will feel very mild. Heavy rain reaching in the far northwest later on. Let's bring you a sports roundup.
Tom Brady should be mentioned in the same breath as sporting greats such as Pele and Muhammad Ali. That from Canadian football coach and NFL pundit Jeff Reinbold. Brady has retired from American football after 22 seasons and 7 Super Bowl titles. Reinbold says Brady was always confident in his own ability.
When he was drafted, one of the first things he did when he went to training camp is he walked up to Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, and said, "My name's Tom Brady." And he said, "I'm going to show you that your drafting me was the best thing you ever did."
Rangers manager Giovanni Van Bronckhorst says there aren't many bigger games in the world than the Old Firm derby. His side take on Celtic at Parkhead later, with just 2 points separating the teams at the top of the Scottish Premier League. Rangers will be without new signing Aaron Ramsey, though. He's lacking match fitness. The first Team GB athletes will get started at the Winter Olympics in Beijing today before the tournament's opening ceremony. Bruce Moa and Jen Dodds are in mixed doubles curling action against Sweden. Dodds says momentum is going to be important in the hunt for medals.
We know we've got a tough start. We do have Sweden and Canada first, which are usually up around the medals. But we just have to take it one game at a time. That's all we can do, and hopefully we can just get the ball rolling a wee bit.
Ahead of the Six Nations, the Duchess of Cambridge has been named patron of the Rugby Football Union and Rugby Football League. Kate takes over from the Duke of Sussex after Harry stepped down as a senior royal. Kensington Palace says the appointment closely aligned with Her Royal Highness's long-standing passion for sport. And sticking with rugby, England will be without Courtney Lawes and Johnny Hill for the Six Nations after both were ruled out with injury. It follows last week's news that captain Owen Farrell will also miss the tournament. England start the campaign against Scotland on Saturday.
This is Times Radio.
Very good afternoon to you.
From Tokyo to the...
Very good. From Tokyo to the what? Matt Chorley here on Times Radio, still joined in the studio by Tim Shipman, chief political commentator for the Sunday Times. We've been answering some of your questions on the YouTube channel, which we will do that during the news. It's fun. We've discovered Tim Shipman's favourite fish. You can only find out and what's behind the big window. You can find out the answer to those questions. Go on to the Times Radio YouTube channel and take a look now. Right, well now, as ever, we're going to take a look at the best of the rest, so that you don't have to sit through all of the dull questions. We kick off with man of the moment. He got kicked out this week. Is he going to behave himself this time? It's the SNP's leader in Westminster, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, that was a disgraceful response. And I have to say to the Prime Minister, he should read the room and he should see some of the faces on his colleagues' faces. He has lost it. Mr. Speaker, we've now reached the ridiculous scenario of a Prime Minister who can't even tell us where he was. Exactly. He lives in a world where he thinks everything is owed to him, and he never pauses to think what he owes to the public. The Prime Minister is now a dangerous distraction at home and a running joke on the international stage. What does it tell the Prime Minister and the public that in the morning that he has returned from Ukraine, the chair of the Defence Select Committee has submitted a letter of no confidence in him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it tells me that it is more vital than ever for the government of this country to get on with the job, deliver our COVID recovery plan, and that is what we are doing.
Oh, he behaved himself today.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because Boris Johnson really, doesn't appear to be affected badly by these questions. People saying you should go, get lost. Theresa May always looked very sad and a bit downcast, and when all this stuff was kicking off with her. And he genuinely is perfectly chirpily able to breeze his way through.
It's all a bit fun. I mean, the most sort of humbled by it all we've seen him was in that interview with Beth Rigby.
Yes, because that was about upsetting the Queen.
Yeah.
And every politician knows that that's bad form.
And you have to be as serious.
Being told to go by Tobias Ellwood, who Boris Johnson, probably has a relatively low opinion of anyway, it literally bounces off him.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to take the blindest bit of notice. I think my favourite line from that was he should see some of the faces on his colleagues' faces. I enjoyed that for me in Blackford. Right, let's go now to the Labour MP, Alex...
I hope he's not suggesting some of them have more than one face.
Surely not. Surely not. The Labour MP, Alex Sobel, had a go at the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was out this weekend speaking to a constituent who has a cold and leaky house. She has seen her bills already go up from £100 to £170 a month. The government have failed to insulate her house and failed to control her fuel bills. Bribing people with their own money is no plan. The Prime Minister has no plan to cut VAT, no plan to get the oil and gas industry to contribute. Another constituent who voted for the Prime Minister went further and called him despicable. What use is a Prime Minister who has no plan for families struggling with the cost of living and has lost the trust of the people of this country?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about cutting VAT. I wonder whether he voted for Brexit and our ability to cut VAT. Perhaps he could indicate. Perhaps he could indicate, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing, which we delivered, Mr. Speaker, and whose anniversary we celebrated on Monday. And what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is, and I sympathise very much with his constituent, and I understand the pressures that people are facing on the cost of living. But what we've got to do is invest in and then protect them, and we're putting £12 billion worth of support and financial help for families in hardship this year, and it's absolutely vital after the pandemic. But the most important thing is to have a jobs-led economic recovery. And in case I failed to make myself clear before you wound me up, Mr. Speaker, that's why we have the fastest economic growth in the G7.
Let's not go around that course again. Now, this is a really interesting sort of two-way row, this, on energy bills. The Labour Party says we should cut VAT, which you can only do because we left the EU, which they didn't support. A point that Boris Johnson makes, while also then not doing the thing which we have the freedom to do because of Brexit.
Yes, the subtle answer to that is that Boris Johnson probably does want to cut VAT, along with quite a lot of his MPs, but that the Chancellor of the Exchequer does not. And as we revealed in the Sunday Times this weekend, it looks like it's not going to happen.
Yes, and instead we've got this slightly complicated plan, which, as Alex Sobel described, is bribing people with their own money, which is on the front of the Times today, where the government will loan money to energy companies so they can keep their energy bills lower now, and then when the wholesale gas prices come down, they will keep their bills artificially high and then use that extra money to pay back the loans, which, as far as I can tell, just means we all end up paying higher bills forever. But I'm not totally sure.
Well, I don't think we know, but yes, that's how it's going to work. Yeah, it's quite a lot more complicated. The idea is that you can target it a bit better than you can with VAT, which is a pretty blunt instrument. Words that Boris Johnson keeps using.
Right,
I was struck, though. The other thing that struck me was him saying that he understands the cost of living pressures that people feel. Now, lots of people think, oh, Boris Johnson's a terribly rich man and, he doesn't understand the price of a pint of milk. But, when you've spent, 800 quid on wallpaper. It's
the cost of living crisis.
He really hasn't got
in different ways,
and all those children. He really hasn't got a great deal of money, and maybe there is a sincerity in that.
And he might
as well.
even have to fork out for some fines yet, which I think it finally did come up at PMQs.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister receives a penalty fixed notice for attending a party or hosting a party during lockdown, will he inform the House and will he resign?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course I will comply with the law, but I've got to wait for the process to be concluded.
Well, that was fascinating, wasn't it? Firstly, if you've got a question and you only have to speak one sentence, you should be able to say fixed penalty notice without saying penalty fixed notice. Number one.
I should have said that was the Labour MP Abina Apong-Asare asking there, if Boris Johnson gets a penalty fixed notice, will he tell us? Because
ministers say if he gets one, he should resign. That's what they're telling me privately. And the answer we got was that he would comply with the law, which is no sign.
That just means he will pay it.
That means he'll pay it, but it doesn't mean he'll tell anybody or that he'll resign.
But we went through quite a cycle yesterday where in the morning, Number 10 was saying they wouldn't make it public if he was fined, and then by the afternoon they said he would.
Yes,
but now
he seems not to be saying that he would.
And we discussed this earlier in the week as well, because the same thing happened on Monday. Boris Johnson was repeatedly asked, will you publish the full Sue Gray report? And he wouldn't commit to it. Then later on, we get an anonymous Number 10 spokesman quote saying that they would publish a further Sue Gray update, which everyone took as a U-turn.
I don't think this is terribly complicated. Boris Johnson never wants to publish or tell anyone anything, and he's pretty open about that.
But crucially, it's easier to go back on something that an anonymous spokesman has said than it is if he said it in the House of Commons.
That is very true. And then there are people around him who think this is not going to hold. And there's a cascade of opinion from within their own party that they have to do it, and they eventually give that ground. But yeah, he doesn't like saying it himself, and he doesn't want it on the record in his own mouth.
Which is why he's cleverly avoided it there, and he will comply with the law. So at least he'll pay the fine if and when he gets one. Tim Shipman.
Well, will he, or will you get somebody else to help him out?
Yeah, get old Lord Brownlow on the phone. His checkmate, as I think he's known. Tim Shipman, lovely to see you, chief political commentator for the Sunday Times. And you'll be able to read Tim's full take on the week in the paper and online this weekend, of course. Coming up, we'll do the quiz, and we're also going to speak to possibly the oldest DJ in the country. He's 91, and we're going to speak to him next on Times Radio.
From Tokyo to the Tadawal, Wall Street to Warsaw, and Chicago to the City of London, the global financial markets never sleep. Make sure you're fully briefed on all the latest money movements and share price fluctuations with Times Radio Business Bulletins.
Every morning on Times Radio, early breakfast from 5 and every night at Drive from 4.
Times Radio Business Bulletins, keeping you well informed throughout the day, every day.
Times Radio.
Across the UK.